I typically go by First Sergeant Padilla. I previously have worked for Texas Parks and Wildlife for the last 16 years, 9 months, running the Buffalo Soldiers program for the states. Ultimately, you come down to three main reasons why these men were given that name Buffalo Soldier. The first one comes down to the appearance. You take the dark skin color and the dark eyes of the soldier. You also take in the hair on top of the head of this dark skinned soldier. Natives weren't used to this experience. If you see the 10th Cav coming across the plains in the dead of winter, and from a distance you see they got dark skin, right? Buffalo has dark skin. They have a buffalo coat on, so they're furry like a buffalo now, but they're riding a horse. So it kind of messed the Indians up. We see a half man, half buffalo creature on horseback. Some Indians thought they were getting punished. This is a half man, half buffalo coming back to haunt them. As they get closer and they start getting in engagements with these troops, they start to realize that this is a soldier. This is a dark-skinned man donning the white man's blue uniform. As they're getting into conflicts and battles, they start noticing the difference. Okay, again, the dark skin, the dark brown eyes, hat flies off in the middle of battle. Oh, that soldier has different hair than the soldiers we've come into account before. So they use that comparison method and they start realizing that the hair on top of the head of the soldier was the same thicker, curlier style hair that the buffalo has in between its horns on what's called the sacred mane. So these are those comparison methods. And then that story just grows and grows and grows. These are the men that look like Buffalo, Buffalo Man or Buffalo Soldier. Many times we are connected to modern war, right? Things we see on TV, even like stuff from Pearl Harbor and things like that. We're not too connected to this time anymore. So when you hear of Buffalo Soldier or military or this war expedition, even my mind, the first thing I think of is tanks, planes, bombs, trench wars, stuff like that, right? You don't think of men helping a wagon train out, but this was a big part of their duty. And men lost their lives in just providing escort duty to settlers moving from one location to another, because you had Native Americans ambushing these wagon trains because of course they were trying to protect their territory. This is their home, and you have outsiders imposing on their land, so the military was brought in. This is why we have a string of forts from the upper and the lower El Paso roads here in Texas. If you look at the map back there, it shows where all the forts were at on West Texas, and that's where a lot of these men lost their lives, either building these forts, dying from some of the conditions out there, or in the battles that we had to get into. This is why I chose to show these pictures. See, what you also find is, again, this was part of the Indian Wars, right? As you start getting further and further into military history, you have African American men and even women at a certain point that are in different units. You have the tank battalions, you have the Black Panthers, you have the Tuskegee Airmen. Some of those men still considered themselves Buffalo Soldiers too, because they weren't a part of the original units, but they're in that lineage of African Americans in the military. That right there is a horse, or that was supposed to be a horse for the military. In I think it was 1896, there was a young lieutenant, Lieutenant Moss, had this idea to replace the horse with the bicycle, because with the horse you can only travel a certain distance. You had to stop and water your horse, you had to stop and feed your horse, you had to stop and rest your horse, right? He said, with the bicycle we can cut all that out. We don't have to feed the bike, we don't have to water the bike, we don't have to rest the bike. They ain't mentioned nothing about the soldier power in the bike. Right, y'all are Buffalo Soldiers, you got that. So he was in command of the 25th Infantry up in Fort Missoula, Montana. He proposed this experiment to his superiors, and they approved it with the caveat that the military was not going to pay for the bikes. So he had to go out there and start soliciting donations for bikes. The first company to say, yeah, we'll provide you with all the bikes was the Spalding Company. The same company that does the basketballs and stuff like that. Spalding used to do bikes. So they gave them these solid iron bikes. They weighed roughly around 70 pounds or so. They weren't aluminum bikes like today. They had solid rubber tires instead of inflatable inner tubes. They had one brake, which was a leather plunger that went down to the front tire, kind of dangerous. They were single speed, and the soldiers still had to pack all their gear on them at the same time. So they ultimately did 3 experimental rides visiting different national parks, as you can see on some of those pictures there. And then the last ride was from Fort Missoula, Montana down to St. Louis. It was a total of 2,000 miles. And they did that 2,000-mile trek in, I believe, 31 or 32 days, a day or so over a month.
Were the Buffalo Soldiers the only group that were part of that experiment with the bicycles?
As far as I know, yes, it was just the 25th Infantry. They took that one unit and they listed it as an experiment. So y'all had great energy, so y'all pulled a lot more out of me. I'm sure the museum here takes volunteers all the time. They're looking for people to help preserve that history and help grow it. And then the organization that I used to run through Texas Parks and Wildlife, it's the Buffalo Soldiers Heritage Program. They're always looking for volunteers also because, again, we try to tell an inclusive story. The focus is the African American military experience and Buffalo Soldiers. But if I tell you that story, I'm including the white officers who led these men, the different multicultural women who played a vital part in that frontier history. I'm talking about the Hispanics because living here in Texas, you were going to run into several Hispanic soldiers or civilians. It's all an inclusive story. So if you're interested in preserving that history, I would reach out to the museum if you live here, or also reach out to Texas Parks and Wildlife and see what opportunities they have for you.